let's make it very clear. The metric in which we judge this debate is the ability to create change, especially in oppressing regimes. Of course, we're not going to contend the fact that if I don't like a certain state, I have the right to boycott it. We are going to contend the effectiveness and the ability to create change. I'm going to have two, maybe three, but don't count on that point in my speech. First of all, I'm gonna explain to you what are the terms in which a regime, and especially an oppressive regime, is being changed. And second of all, I'm going to show you how a boycott affects negatively the ability of certain political factors within the same state to act successfully against the regime. And then if I get to it, and I will continue, we will talk about the fluffy stuff of cooperation and how that promotes the change of regime. Okay, so let's get right into it. How do you change a regime? Basically, an oppressive regime is a regime that uses certain conflict or certain power that he has invested in him by the public in order to emphasize that same power on other groups who cannot hope to be the majority within the country. That is a problem for that group, of course, because they don't have any ability to change their own situation. So that means that in order to change the regime, we need a change in the political structure within the state. That means that we need the factions that disagree with the country's agenda, with the country's lines, to gain political power. It's that simple. We have, of course, the ability to change regime from the outside with a military intervention, but that usually doesn't fly away with the local population that perceives it as an illegitimate intervention with their own internal affairs. So basically, if we parallel this to the situation here in Israel, if you are worried about the rights of Palestinians, you need to give the left-wing parties more ability to operate against the agenda of the right-wing party. Having taken that into context, we need to think about what happens when you get an academic and cultural regime to the political power of the state. For that, we need to understand which kind of methods does the state use in order to protect itself from that kind of boycott. So basically, when you get a regime, when you get a conflict that is based on identity of a predominant group within the society against another one, the state has a few tools. First of all, they can tie up with a message that says that any outside interference against the state, that means interference against the identity of the people who live in the state, of the people who make the majority, like the Likud parties can use any criticism made against the government policy by saying, oh no, they just hate the Jews and hate Israel. Second of all, they can control the context by saying, yeah, the people from outside don't understand, they don't have the information, they don't know what we are dealing with. And third, and most important, they can emphasize the harms that are being caused by external people who have a perversive incentive of just harming them. Okay, so now let's talk about academia and artists. We're talking about groups who are famously known for being cosmopolitical. In academia, you basically create leaders who cooperate with one another and in most cases identify themselves with subversive elements within the regime. On the other hand, on the same line, artists use the identification with messages through stories that make you identify with complex realities in order to make you think differently about things that happen. Basically, smolanim. Why is that? Because they identify the self in a cosmopolitical view that detaches the subject matter that they use from the national identity, and they use more individualism in order to persuade their messages. Okay, so now after we have all that, let's understand how boycott plays into it. First of all, the government is able to hijack the message and point of those artists as people from outside, those artists and those academia, people outside who sit in their high towers, they don't understand, and they speak about subjects that relates to us. But second of all, they can portray that message as emphasizing the unfairness of it, of taking a very one-sided and not nuanced narrative that those people who take part of the boycott, who take the part of the boycott, use. Basically, they use a division that says you're either with us or against us. And why is that problematic in order to making change? Because as I said earlier on, in order to make change, you need to strengthen the parts within the government that are for that kind of change, the political alternative, But when you create a generalization, you basically disable those same parts within the society to operate. Why is that? Because any artist that now makes a critic against the government is Roger Waters. Any academic article who basically goes out and says, no, we should do this or should do that, is being accused by a perversive incentive, and by tying that to the general public identity, it's much easier for the government to delegitimize those sectors of the population that are meant to make you cooperate more with the other side, that are meant to move you by creating an identification between the general public and the minority. Before we continue, yes, closing.
Those points are true for literally any kind of protest. Do you support any kind of protest or boycott against an oppressive regime? What do you suggest we do instead?
Okay, let's make it clear. When you protest via academia, via art, you basically say there are parts of population who are identified with objection to the government who are now illegitimate. Everybody from within that society who tries to identify with those kind of protests is illegitimate. And the problem is that when you tie it to the grand national narrative of us against them, those kind of people have very little sway. We do support protests when it creates pressure that helps to persuade the people we need persuading. But when you create a pressure that it's directed by and to the people who already think differently from the government, basically you create a futile effort by preaching to the choir and by delegitimizing those very groups in the eyes of the people that you are trying to persuade. You basically make it impossible for the minority to become a majority and hijack the political or take the political power in the country. So yes, we do support protests, just not a futile one. Thank you.
Look, it might be the late hour, but I'm honestly baffled by the cases we just heard from the open government. I just don't understand which cases are they talking about. It seems from Hernan that they're talking about cases in which artists from the same country do some sort of actions against the same country. This is not what we generally describe as art boycott or academic boycott. This is usually said to be when outside forces, i.e. other countries or other people within other countries, boycott artists coming from a country, but we will respond to that. I will take a POI from our opening at the very start to clarify this, but let's talk first of all about their work. If they say that artists will be smeared by the government, we think that if a government has a strength to do that, it has an incentive to do that anyhow, no matter if the artists boycott or don't boycott anything. If the artists portray opinions that are against the said government, this is something that the government anyway has the incentive to do, and is usually quite effective at doing that specifically. So we don't think these cases change much within the debate, and we are now at the minute, so OJ.
Yeah, sure. We are against Roger Waters being identified with the Dag Nachash. Please engage with it.
Okay, so we don't think this is not the usual situation in which cultural boycotts happen, right? It's people trying to appear abroad, or people trying to come to let's say Israel or any other place to perform. We just have a problem with the definition then. This is the very minority of cases. I'm going to do then three things within my speech. I'm going to talk about boycotts, why they usually target the people who are actually to blame in the change in the discourse. Then I'm going to the bad changes that are happening. Then I'm going to talk about discourse, and lastly about legitimacy. Let's see who cultural boycotts usually target. You usually would target the people who actually stand very strongly for the opinion that you want to target. I.e., if you want to target Israel, you usually would target right-wing academia people. If you're talking about an inner situation, like let's say in the United States, you would usually target academic people like Peterson or other of the kind. I think these are people you usually would target. Why? Because the boycott is a really extreme move. You give away a lot of the reasonable discourse for actually defending your opinion, and say, okay, this is an individual that we are not willing to engage this with whatsoever. We like to face backlash for everything everyone that believes is an individual, the country that supports the individual, many other negative influences upon you. This is a harm that you need to take as an academia facility that will now have less cooperation with Israeli personnel. This is usually a very extreme thing to go. What does it mean that you usually target the easier targets to be targeted, right? The people who actively support said regime, or actually actively support bad opinions within our own country. Why is it crucial? Because that means that you usually target the people who, A, are to blame, B, the people who usually actually portray the vast majority of the bad discourse and portray the vast majority of the bad opinion. So, moving to discourse, how does it happen? Not yet. We think that two things happen. Why two things make this a very effective tool, right? We think that the first is the fact that you prevent this specific individual to spread his or her opinion within the place, within where you're going. Think that, let's say in the example of the United States, having Peterson, going to places within academia, spreading these opinions to young minds, convincing them in these opinions that are usually bad, or any other general Trump supporters who generally think are bad in this debate. Hopefully this will not be in contention. So we generally think that the fact that you prevent them actually stifles their ability to have a meaningful discourse within itself, actually spread their message. What happens on the converse side? What happens after you boycott an individual? The whole mess of the thing, the whole public circus that happens because of the boycott asks the general question: why are we boycotting this kind of individual? What are the motives of the people that are actually coming here and are actually doing this extreme thing, shouting in the lecture hall, not letting this happen? This lets them these people, the people who are boycotting, to actually hijack the discourse. Like explain their opinion, have the media attention themselves. They are the one being interviewed by press. They are the one who get all the attention. This is good. Now we can spread more of the converse opinion when we come to tackle bad things, whether internal or external. We think that the fact that you prevent the bad sort of discourse and get the good kind of discourse from the people who oppose is something that is actually very good for people. We think that academia is less tainted by this kind of bad opinions and is generally better. Idan.
Yeah, although no info slide was given, usually when you talk about cultural boycotts, we don't talk about Ben Shapiro, but we talk about the apartheid or the BDS. Are you also defending that or not?
Yes, I think all of my analysis also cross-applies to BDS people. I have explained to you, if you want to apply this directly to this example, why the people who are likely to get boycotted are likely people who are likely to be mostly pro the Israeli regime, and why the discourse then becomes better and becomes about the Palestinian problem and not for the message that this individual wanted to show. I think this is generally very largely cross-applies. Let's talk about legitimacy. I have 2 points here. The first, if we adopt the model of opening government, we think, which is that artists shouldn't boycott their country, we think that in that situation they actually have an obligation to do so, right? Because if they're in a country and the situation is bad and they're the ones who are supposed to promote this and supposed to raise the voice of the people who don't have, of those who don't have one, to actually change people, they have the obligation to at least do this. This is why we have academia to criticize the regime. This is why we have artists to criticize the regime. We think that if you apply their model to the legitimate question, this falls very easily to our side of the house, because then it's the single most important role of these people to actually go and spread their opinion in that way, to do whatever they can against the regime. But if you if you talk about the general boycott, the BDS or something like that, think that this is the artistic institutions or academic institutions have also the obligation to do so. Why? Because they are also the ones who are supposed to control the discourse within their own respective countries, whether in Europe or the United States. They have the obligation to prevent bad opinions that are likely to shape the discourse in a bad way, that is, pro the bad regime that we are fighting against, and keep the discourse clean towards a better discourse that we all would want. Generally, it's just better for discourse. We think this is way within the role of academic people and artist people. We beg you to oppose.
So, 2 main things in my speech. More on why this is the most ineffective way ever to create change within those countries. Secondly, why we do need a strong academia and art in order to create a change that probably oppositions want for the reason that they do this boycott. They want to create change, it is more likely to happen under our circumstances. Before that, a very important clarification for the case to get from opening opposition. What is the likely cultural and academic boycott? Because if we thought it would be quite clear that what we talk about is the following. A, we're talking about the fact that articles from universities, let's say in Israel, won't be published in magazines, right? If the boycott is in Israel. It means that academics from Israel cannot go to study in other countries and the other works. It means that artists from foreign countries, let's say American artists, will not go to perform in those territories. It means that those artists within those countries will not get funds from the Western countries, from the countries actually performing the boycott. This is the likely kind of cultural and academic boycott. What opening opposition tries to tell you is the weird thing about the personal boycott that they talk about, right? Most of the analysis goes the following. We have some people in academia that are probably having like bad messages. We don't want them to perpetuate those messages. It seems like the analysis means that the most likely boycott that opening opposition wants is one that goes directly against government officials that are the ones perpetuating the bad things. Meaning, it is a different kind of boycott that does not mean that it's necessary to ban academia. We see in Russia specifically, we have sanctions that go specifically against government officials that are doing bad things. This is great. We are for that. We are not for academic and art kind of boycott. So this is the main thing that we get from opening opposition. We said that this debate is not about banning one person, but more than that, Hernan already tells you that academia is usually the most liberal part of the country. So we just don't see it ever happening that we see boycotts aiming specifically at specific academics that are talking specifically. It just never happens. But more than that, it is unlikely to be the case in this debate because academia tends to be more liberal than other people. So let's see about the fact that why you think it is an ineffective way of change. What Hernan gives you about the fact that the ability to hijack the message is much higher when you ban things that people like. For example, academia and art. It's very easy for you to hijack the message when this is the thing that the foreign countries are targeting. It's not directly the government that is doing the bad thing for the people. It's the thing that people like going to school and art. The ability to hijack the message is so much higher, and if you want to change the actual regime, you cannot get that when you hijack this message in this level. Secondly, when we talk specifically about academia and art, these are things that do not directly affect the regime, meaning they're pretty much okay if you're an oppressive regime that you don't have artists from the outside coming and giving all those Western values, and you don't have artists from within getting funds in order to show art that goes against the regime. This is great for you as an oppressive regime. You're quite happy with it, meaning that the harm done to the regime is so small that you're unlikely to actually change the way. And the one determining the policy, the one doing the oppressive thing, is the government, and you want to change them. And if you are ineffective in changing them in any way, you shouldn't boycott academia and art. Thirdly, and also importantly, we say, CO tells us, well, we don't have like any objection, we can do other things, we can do sanctions and all that. We say those are things that are effective, we want to do sanctions to specific people, but what is more effective is changing the regime from within. And this is exactly what we say. In order, when we have an oppressive regime, in order to create change, you need to change the government usually. You need to change the leader. How do you do that? Mostly in democratic party countries, it means changing the party. But overall, in almost all cases, you need a strong opposition within those countries. You need people that are educated, that can convince people to the large. You need people that are strong, that connect people, specifically artists and people from academia are able to create this kind of change. Are the strong opposition needed? When you give them less money, when you give them more than that, you're less likely to create a change from within. And this brings me to my main point on why we think we need a strong academia. So let's understand the following. Academia needs grants, specifically if you want to make a research that doesn't go specifically what the government wants. If you want to research, for example, in social sciences and economics, you want to research and you have actual data on why the way that your country acts is bad. Why it's bad for minorities. If you want to research how your country acts, you need foreign money because your own country wouldn't want to give you that money, and more than that, oppressive regimes are scared from strengthening powers within the country, and they're unlikely to give a lot of money to academia because they're scared of what they can do with this sort of money. Secondly, specifically when we're talking about academia, the kind of prestige and cooperation that you have from other countries is what makes your university something, it what makes it last. You need this kind of article being published, you need all those things happening. Why is that so bad? The thing is, firstly, when we talk about people coming to power within countries, they're usually people with more education. Why is that? Because they're more likely to go and think that they can't change what's happening, more than that they have actual knowledge on what is happening is wrong. They're more exposed to Western values. And in order for them to be exposed to those things, you need cooperation with the West. You need cooperation with as many countries, and you need the fund for research. So we say those people are probably likely to achieve high roles within those oppressive regimes, and we want them to be powerful, to have enough information, to be able to do effective lobbying. Secondly, about the fact that academia has less prestige and less funds, it needs to block the amount of people entering the university. And we say that higher education is the kind of thing that makes people go out of poverty, makes people question the situation that they live, and make people more likely to go against the regime because they have money, because they aren't useful for their very life. Before I continue with that point, closing.
The goal of any oppressive regime in the world is to make it seem as if there is no oppression, there is anything wrong, everything is legitimate. What those movements forced everyone that comes to that country is to take a stand and say, do you think that is a
thing? In order to create a stand, in order to communicate a message, you need someone coming and communicating a message. When someone isn't there to communicate the message, when an artist isn't coming in order to tell you, listen, you need to do something, you need to create a change, you just don't get this kind of message. This message is so far away from you, and you aren't able to create change. So just wrapping up my point about the fact that we just have less people achieving higher education. What does that mean? Meaning that they have, again, a lot of population within those countries not as exposed to the West, not as exposed to other values, and are fearful for their lives, are fearful for their job, and less likely to go and do the things and go against an oppressive regime. And all analysis works on artists as well. Again, we want a strong artist within the country because art is the method for you to go against the regime. When you don't have funds coming from the outside, when you don't have consumers from the West buying art of people within those regimes, they're less likely to act. They will probably have a lot of the regime working against them. So at the end, we say the following. This is an ineffective method to change the way the regime acts. And secondly, we need strong academia and art to create change from within this country and actually achieve the goals the opposition probably want in creating those boycotts. We call it a purpose.
It's important to be clear about what's the comparative in this debate under our side. We don't need to support each and every boycott, right? Because we just think that we can support conditional boycotts on specific people, specific individuals that do bad things, and we think that we can change their behavior. Why do we think this is the likely scenario? Specifically when we're talking inside academia, specifically when we're talking inside of art, a lot of people are just likely to prefer a discussion where you refute specific arguments that are problematic for you. You create a discussion that can actually change people's minds. That's the way they would prefer. Idan explained to you already why specifically a boycott is specifically so extreme. It specifically harms the people that take part in this boycott, and that's why it's likely that most people in academia won't even do it if it's not conditional, if it won't help the cause and the goal that they are trying to achieve. This changes entirely the comparative under First House and how we view this debate. So yes, first of all, we support also boycotting government ministers in the government and stuff like that. We think they are people in the oppressive regime. We are fine with oppressing them. I'm going to do 3 things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to talk about efficacy. Second of all, I'm going to talk about how this affects academia specifically. And lastly, I'm going to talk about commitment. So let's talk about efficacy. So O's main argument about efficacy is, look, the government is going to hijack the discourse specifically inside the government. Once we tell you that it's not likely that the government will be able to change, we tell you this. If the government is so strong, if the government can actually shun away opposition arguments, if the government can actually say, look, the people who ask to boycott this government, who are really similar to the opposition, they have a very large interest to do this anyway. They're going to do this anyway. They're very powerful in their countries by the characterization that we got from OG. We don't think that it's likely that they would do, we just think it's likely that they would have the same impact on both sides, would have the same power on both sides. So hijack inside the country isn't the likely scenario that we want to talk about. What do we think actually changes regimes? Pressure from the outside, right? So here are a few things. First of all, when a lot of people now are aware about this specific thing, right? A lot of people in Western countries weren't aware of how bad the apartheid regime was when it existed. Then this creates awareness. This creates a lot more people now pressuring their governments to actually cause some kind of change. This creates more and more people now wanting to boycott and send less money and funds and stuff like that. Why is this important in the comparative? Because if governments are going to act in a bad way and going to shun opposition anyway, then most of government's harms just don't accrue in this debate. But when we're talking about people that had no knowledge about this conflict, people that weren't involved and didn't want to be involved in the first place, we create a huge difference in their hearts and minds in how much they want to affect the change. But moreover, we say, specifically when we do a conditional boycott, this actually affects the people themselves, right? Because first of all, when you do a boycott against me, then I feel personally attacked. I feel now a lot of people are going to approach me and explain to me how bad this is. Sometimes it will lead to death threats and stuff like that. We just say these are stuff that are very effective in actually making people not do stuff. But moreover, note, when we're talking specifically about academia and art, these people care very much about their name, about how people in the academia perceive them. Once a lot of people in the academia have a conditional boycott, once people don't want me as a lecturer in other universities, they don't want to publish my articles, they don't want to engage in any kind of discussion, this means that my name in academia and culture in general just is hurt significantly. If I can't communicate my ideas inside of academia, it doesn't matter what happens outside of academia because that's what I worked for so hard for so many years. What does this mean? This means that these people have a very large interest of changing their own behavior by themselves. Before I continue.
The boycotting party doesn't get to participate in the discourse that is created around the boycott. Therefore, the government can shape the narrative of harming the national identity just as he likes.
Again, the government can do this anyway if the position is really similar to these people. We don't understand what the difference. Even if it's very large and the government just has so much power, we don't see how this changes under the comparative. We actually show you how when we target individuals and when we create more public discourse outside the country, this actually creates more pressure than the one that exists right now. But moreover, let's talk about how this affects academia, because OG are really worried about, research budgets and stuff like that. Specifically, when you do a conditional boycott, this means that it's much more likely that outside governments will give a lot of funds to people from the opposition. It's much more likely that it will give funds to people who do research specifically about what opposes this government, specifically about what bothers these people in the boycott. This means that we still get most of the ideas. Actually, we get more of them because we now get much more funds from outside governments. And note, in most democratic countries, you won't be able to shun out the opposition entirely. You won't be able to shut them up. If we're talking about dictatorships and oppressive regimes, we just don't think this is the comparative. We don't think they are likely to allow people to criticize them very much publicly. We don't think that the information will flow outside of the country. So, in the end of the day, specifically in democratic countries, you just get better discourse even inside the country. We get better research inside the country. But lastly, it's more to know there is a case about obligation specifically here. Why? Because specifically when I worked inside of academia, other people taught me inside of academia. I have tutors, I have people from the country I'm in that actually pay tuition, pay my tuition and pay for my research. This means that I owe these people some kind of debt for the fact that they paid and helped create me. Notice that specifically when I create these so extreme ideas that shouldn't be engaged with inside academia, I'm actually hurting my position in academia. It's very much likely, it's very important to note that specifically artists and people in academia have an obligation to boycott specifically these people, right? Even if you don't believe that they have an obligation towards society, the other people have an obligation to boycott them when they create some kind of discussion that you can't even talk to, you can't even engage with. This is just an extreme idea, and we just want to boycott all of them.
I'm going to have 2 points. First of all, why this specific boycott cause internal pressure to actually prevent change, and secondly, why the regimes uses the boycott in order to stop people from actually entering into places of conflict, actually helping and showing the world what actually happening there. But first, a couple points on the button. Firstly, about the idea about a specific lecturer that comes somewhere and we want to stop him from spreading his ideas. From everything we've seen until today, every time that one of those lecturers was stopped, if it's Ben Shapiro, if it's an Israeli lecturer, he became even bigger than it was before. Instead of a small lecture of 30 people, we have a huge underdog that people watches his YouTube clips, that people in every big newspaper knows that he didn't have the ability to talk in a university, and the amount of people who sees his ideas, the amount of people who listen to him get greater by a lot. So even on the cases that we're all talking about, they're actually losing. Secondly, they tell us, look, boycotts are very effective because it makes pressure on academics to go against the regime. Look, the point is that academics are not the one who actually changes the regime. Every time that a leader can see it, can use the backlash that happens and say, I'm not going to be answering to bullies, I'm not going to stop by that, he doesn't really care how much what happened to his academia, and it doesn't really affect the change. And we can fund researchers who go against the regime. It's not mutually exclusive. We don't think it's very effective, but we can do it without the boycott. Okay? So let's talk about the backlash from the boycott. Okay? Because why specifically boycott and not other measures of protest makes huge backlash. Okay? Why not having a paper against the regime, or having a newspaper article, or having a TV show, or any other kind of protest doesn't make the same reaction from the people of the country? First of all, when people boycott me as a citizen, I feel attacked. What do I mean? If someone is engaging in a conversation, he's saying that we have a problem, that we are not moral, that we have, then I feel that I am a part of this conversation, that my narrative has a place here. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it might be changed, but I am in a part of a conversation that in the end someone is going to change his mind. When we use boycott, the saying, what we hear is your narrative doesn't matter. You are so bad, and your actions are so dismissible, and your ideas are so bad that we are not going to listen to them. We are going to boycott them. At that point, people don't feel that they have a legitimate criticism. They feel it's someone's coming after them because it doesn't matter what you say back. It doesn't matter what you're going to do. You are already the evil one. You are already the one who suffered. So this is causing huge backlash against cooperation with those kinds of bodies that wants change. Secondly, it's easy to see that those kind of backlash are just ineffective. When you boycott the academia, when a lot of it is liberal and actually going against the regime or against the occupation, when you boycott culture and you boycott sports, when this is a specific place when you actually can see cooperation between, let's say, Palestinian or Israel or oppressive regime, and then these are the places when we boycott them, when the person at house see it, they just don't feel it's really in the idea of them, they don't really want to change my mind, they don't really want to change the situation. They just want to attack me and to make me feel bad and make me feel attacked. It again doesn't something that makes me feel that I should be a part of the conversation and think about my beliefs. Thirdly, as you know, it's a lot easier for politicians to frame it as a war because of the both reasons I told you before, because it's irrational, because it's not something of conversation. It's a lot easier to say it's us against them. We don't need to listen to them. We don't need to change our mind. We need to get stronger even if we get attacked just to pass it through. It means that even people who are going against the regimes, even people who say we have problems, we need to change the situation, they feel I am against that, but I am not going to be a part of, but I'm not going to help with those people or with those or with others, because right now I'm being attacked by myself and I cannot attack my own government. Theo.
Amichay is absolutely right. The view that this is just another political dispute where some people are right and some people are wrong and we should just discuss it until the end of all times is exactly what you're trying to fight against. This is something that should be stopped, not discussed about.
look, if it's something that should be stopped, you should go with guns and you should go with huge sanctions, and it's not something that you're going to stop with boycott. Boycott only changes the perception of the people inside the country. So in this specific tool that you are using, the only question that matters is, in this specific case, is how the people are changed and how the people think, and not the bigger change. Okay. And secondly, let's talk about things that actually makes countries move or actually helps real people, because we think that boycotting makes country use has an excuse to stop NGOs and people who work there. You can see it in Israel. If someone goes into an area of conflict and saying, I'm here to teach children, I'm here to give medicine, it's extremely hard politically to stop him at the border and doesn't let him actually go in. But once, most of those people are a part of a boycott movement. They are not an NGO workers, they are not healthcare. No, they are soldiers in the war against us. They are actually harming us actively. We can see that in Israel, once the boycott started, a lot of NGOs were stopped at the borders and actually didn't let to go into the cities. And we can see it in other conflicts too. Why is that so bad? It's bad, first of all, because once they're there, they're actually doing change. When you have doctors there, when you have teachers there, when you have people working with children, when you have people who actually make change and help the people who are oppressed lives, they're actually doing it. And every one of them who are stopped and doesn't go there actually help the people of the minority who needs it. Secondly, when they're there, they're actually protecting the minority. Why? Because you are not going to use your soldier or do the worst thing when you have someone from an NGO or from other country there. Secondly, by taking pictures of the problem, we're talking to people, telling them how they can explain the problem. And thirdly, just by showing the world what really happens there. When they're going there with cameras, with microphones, and writing people's stories, writing what actually happens, they're giving pictures of the problems. Then, when they show that to the public, not as a boycott, but as an article, but as an idea, but as a picture, this is where people actually move and actually do a real change. This is where you have real pressure from government. Then you tell us, so why wouldn't the regime stop them? Because as I told you, it's extremely hard politically to stop someone with medicine, someone who is an NGO, someone that everything that he does is actually helping people. But once he is tainted by a boycott, it is a lot easier politically to actually stop him because he chose our side. He's not here to help. He's here to go against us, and this is the hat that we are stopping him from actually going there. Because it actually changed the life of the people in there, and because it worsened the perception of the people in the regime, in the country. Please propose. Thank you very much.
For evil to flourish, all it takes is for good people to be silent. The Israeli political map has shifted significantly to the right over the past years, and now something that was unthinkable, a major party in our parliament that says that maybe, possibly, we should annex Palestinians without giving them the right to vote, is sitting with power and is likely to gain in the next elections. When we allow the normalization of these atrocities, when we don't actively force people who kind of probably agree with us on the left to speak out, to go out and protest, to make sure that they are fighting against these encroaching settlements, etc., and also things that aren't just in Israel, we say that when we allow that to happen, that's when we lose. We have to put people on the spot, and only when we put people on the spot in these kinds of situations are we going to win. So proud to oppose. Cool. Okay, we're going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about one, this normalization, two, the notion of solidarity with the oppressed people. Before that, 3 points of rebuttal. First, so they tell us, look, you say this backlash, and then I feel attacked, and then I feel like I can't engage, and it makes me feel sad inside, and now I can't do it. So here's the thing. First of all, we say, yes, we think that it is critically important that you make people feel attacked, that you put them outside of their comfort zone, and you force them to take a stance, and it's not just some other political game. I'll get to that in my point. But second of all, it is not the case that any attack equally, suddenly forces people to feel, oh no, now I have to defend myself. Sometimes people can listen to the attacks that they get, particularly when they're already inclined to agree with you to begin with. Again, talk about that more in my case, right? Then they tell us, look, the alternative here, right, if it's such a terrible thing, as we told you that it is, then we have to go in, guns blazing, etc. We say, yes, we think that is the alternative that people take when they don't feel like they're supported, and I'm going to talk about that in my second point. And then lastly, they tell me, look, what happens is, when you stop this, you stop NGOs from coming in, and you give the regime an excuse to stop them. So here's the thing. One, NGOs can still really clearly just be NGOs that are just bringing in medicine and just like taking pictures or whatever it is, and literally the Red Cross, which is not politically affiliated, and then the government, under their logic, has a really hard time stopping them. Or, alternatively, the government are the kinds of people who don't really care that it looks bad that they're stopping people from coming in with medicine, and they're willing to make up stuff and say, oh no, we're worried that they might smuggle in all kinds of things that help them, that we're then allowed, like cement or whatever, and then they come up with an excuse to stop them anyway. We don't think there's some kind of massive delta here under the situation, which is the thing we don't think we're stopping people from bringing medicine. Let's talk about normalization, because here's the situation. We think that what happens is that you have a massive number of people who are supposedly in Israel would be the left, or whatever it is, that's against the atrocities that we're talking about that are happening in this country, that for that reason we're doing this boycott, right? But we think that most of these people are mostly silent, and we think that this includes all those academics and like arts people that opening wanted to talk about as being, oh, they're usually so liberal and they're not the ones that we should be boycotting. Most of those people stay silent as well. They may vote when they go and vote for the thing that's against the atrocity for whatever reason, but we think that clearly that's not enough, or else they would have succeeded at changing. But what they're not doing, for most of them, is actively speaking out. Either one, because actively speaking out takes a significant amount of effort and no one just cares enough to do it. So supposedly against, but they just don't care that much. Or two, because it actively costs them at home to speak out. If they're not literally branded as left, and that's where they get their people that come to their concerts from, right? Then we say that when you do that and you alienate a group of people in your country, that's costing you something, that unless you have a good enough reason to do so, you are unwilling to take that step. We say, no, you cannot be silently, supposedly liberal. You have to take an active stance. Let's look at how we force people to do that. One, when it comes to these academics and artists themselves, then they want to continue to have careers that interact with people like around the world. They want to continue to be able to visit other countries, and they want to do that because that's where they make a ton of their money, is by going on tour across Europe or America. Then we tell them, you have to take a stance. If you are vocally, actively super against the regime and you spend the vast majority of your time criticizing them, then we will let you go. That's why we let like Bressler talk also at boycott events, right? Even though they're Israeli, because if you're actively involved in attacking the regime, then the boycott doesn't apply to you, right? And so we force them to speak out. Two, we force women's. No, cool. The second what we say that we force the people who are otherwise feel like they care about, say, the Palestinian cause or apartheid or anything along those lines, but don't care about it that much, to feel it in their own lives. Because now it's not just that I think that this is a bad thing and I privately think that, but it's actively hurting me, actively hurting maybe my prospects in academia if I want to go study abroad. It's hurting my ability to like have the artists that I want come play here, etc., etc. And it exacts the cost that's actually from you. And the sad fact about human psychology is that all the atrocities that are happening to someone else that I mostly can't see because they're in another city or behind a fence that separates them from me, as terrible as they are less likely to physically get me out there to go and talk about things than the fact that it actually hurts me right now. So we force these people to actively speak out. Before I continue, yeah, go. The best way to make an opposition speak and act is to give them resources to actually do so. When you weaken the opposition, they are less likely to create a change within the regime. Right, except as we explained, most of these academics, most of these artists aren't involved in actively speaking out most of the time because it does not work for them, it exacts political costs from them inside their country, or they just don't care. So we get these people actively speaking out and actively protesting. We think it's massive. Okay, now they tell us, look, the problem is that you allow the government to hijack the message when you do this, and then their message just isn't that effective. 3 answers to this. One, we tell you that just isn't, as we said, this isn't a massive delta going on here between what they likely to do to your message anyway. But more importantly, we say there's a reason why criticism can still work. Two, one, because it doesn't matter how much you hijack my message if I'm a really good and effective storyteller. If I was now moved to create a piece that painted a Palestinian child who's getting killed in a way that was illegitimate, etc., and it made you cry because I was good at my job and I was an effective artist, and the fact that often someone came and said, oh, they only did that because they were being boycotted or whatever, it doesn't undermine enough the fact that I made you cry about this person and I made you care enough to fight against the thing. But second of all, we say it's because we're working not on the people who disagree, but on the people who already agree with us, and all we're doing is forcing them to actively say, wait, this isn't normal. This isn't something that's just politics. This is something we actually have to fight for, and they are the kind of people who are likely to accept criticism, beg you to